Hello, and welcome to my channel, where I explain leftist topics in as brief and understandable a fashion as I possibly can. The purpose of this video is not to convince you that I am right, but to explain my interpretation of the leftist point of view. Because if you are going to disagree with it, you should at least know what it is you disagree with. With that in mind, I hope the discussion in the comments stays focused on understanding rather than mockery. Today's topic is the leftist belief that white culture is not a thing, and why, although appearing contradictory, black culture is a thing. Let's start by defining culture. A culture is the collective norms of a group of people. What food is considered normal, what language is considered normal, what religious beliefs are considered normal. This group can be as big as the population of a continent, or as small as a family unit. These cultural groups can be determined by geography, nationality, religion, or even a common language. Each individual belongs to multiple cultures, each a part of their identity. Now that we have settled what a culture is, let us discuss why white isn't a culture. It should be noted that saying white is not a culture does not mean that white individuals do not have a culture. That would be practically impossible. White people have national culture, the culture of their religion, of their language. For example, an American son of an Irish Catholic immigrant has inherited Irish cultural norms, learned American cultural norms, and been raised in Catholic cultural traditions. However, many leftists argue there is no culture based solely on skin color. Asian culture is referring to the cultural norms of the people living in the geographic area we call Asia. German culture is based on nationality. Hispanic culture is based around the Spanish language. No skin color on earth has a unifying culture, because skin color cannot dictate learned behavior. If that were the case, albino South Africans would technically qualify as being a part of white culture. So, what about black culture? Why do leftists say white culture isn't a thing, but black culture is? Well, that would be because black culture is most commonly used as a shorthand by leftists for black American culture. It is not dictated solely by skin color, as you wouldn't consider a newly arrived immigrant from Kenya to belong to black culture, and likewise, that Kenyan immigrant would not view themselves as having much culturally in common with black Americans. Black culture is a subset of American culture, like Irish American culture. So, does that mean white American culture is a thing? Well, this is where things get a little tricky. White American culture is just American culture. America being founded and being majority populated by white people, they had the largest sway over what did and did not become normal in their society. There are subcultures in America that would be considered white, but they are based on nationality. Irish American, Italian American, etc. This is where things get interesting, as why black culture in America became a thing is due to a rather unique set of circumstances. When black people were brought to America as slaves, many were stripped of their original cultural identities. They were given new names, prevented from practicing their religions, and often forbidden from speaking their native languages. Over generations, many ancestral traditions were lost. By the time slavery ended, many black Americans no longer knew where in Africa their ancestors came from, or what their original cultural traditions were. And although Africa did have its own cultural norms as a geographic location, this was long before Google, and information on those practices simply wasn't available. As a side note, culture on a continental scale is fairly broad, and barely qualifies as a category, as each general rule tends to have notable exceptions. Normally, minority groups tend to assimilate into the dominant culture over time. However, after slavery ended, segregation prevented black Americans full participation in American society. They couldn't sit in the same restaurants, couldn't go to the same schools, couldn't drink from the same water fountain. So, unable to participate in American culture fully, and with ancestral culture long forgotten, black Americans were forced to form their own culture, through a combination of creativity, what small traditions that had been passed down, and necessity. Now, there are things from black culture that have gained wide enough acceptance from the majority white population to become American culture. Jazz and gospel music gave birth to rock and roll music, and as black people became more and more accepted by white society, more and more elements of black culture began becoming part of American culture. Potentially, the line between black culture and American culture will continue to blur to the point where it no longer exists. When black people in America feel accepted and integrated enough where black American culture just becomes American culture. However, we haven't yet reached that stage. Although acceptance has grown at a remarkable rate, it is nowhere near universal. There are many Americans today that say black culture with a sneer, like it is something repulsive, to be avoided. Those individuals, seeking to separate themselves from that mixing American culture, invented a new term, white culture. The term white culture came about as a form of rejection, whereas the term black culture came about from being rejected. That is why the two terms are not treated the same, and why the majority of leftists view the term white culture as racist. This concludes our discussion on the concept of white culture. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. Thank you for your time.